Hey there, friends. So I wanted to just say a few words, few, few words about this concept of chi that I keep bandying about in the eight days, 8 pieces course that we're doing, and just expand on this a little bit, at least in relation to the practice itself as we have been doing it. Um, Chi as a concept is huge and something not native to the Western mind and the Western way of thinking, but very much entrenched in the Eastern way of thinking. So, having said that, I am a Westerner. I've never been to an Eastern country. I am not immersed in Eastern culture at all. So, I apologize in advance for any erroneous things I may say about this. My experience with it has been through many years of learning, studying, practicing, and even more practicing, and trying to really wrap my understanding around what this concept is. So, in the Westernese, it's often translated as life force energy, which is partially true. I think it's a little bit oversimplified, overgeneralized, and what it actually is way more interesting than that. It's very much rooted in the understanding of relationships between things, where Western thought, and it's not an either or, and it's not one is right and one is wrong, but Western thought tends to see things more in discrete, individuated parts. Whether it's the environment around us, it's our bodies, it's our person, it's our organs, all of that. Where Eastern science, Eastern philosophy, all of that was very concerned with how the parts related to one another. And the qualities of those relationships is what we would refer to as chi, right? And so it was very relative to whatever it was we were observing. So it's a very general term, but it's also a very specific term. All right. So Qigong literally means chi, however we want to define that, life force energy. And Gong or Kong is like the long disciplined study of something. So Kung Fu. Um, so it's the study of Qi. And I think I meant to look this up. Maybe I'll add this in later. I think the Chinese character for Qi is the steam that comes off rice. So it's an interesting concept. Anyway, and it's also interesting because when we bring it into common conversation, there's a little bit of a sense of the woo woo around it, maybe, or that it's something mystical, or just and again, I think it was just so taken for granted as as concrete and real as anything else we could put our hands on and measure. And I think we talk about chi all the time, even though we don't realize that that's what we're referring to when we say we feel drained, or we feel scattered, or we feel uplifted, or we want to feel more grounded. We're speaking in terms of this whole body experience of what's going on with our own chi, our own life force, if you will. Where I think it starts to get interesting is, one, it's less a generalized energy and more, well, one thing we can I've seen it defined as bioelectric current, if that helps wrap our heads around it a little bit more. So current suggests flow, suggests movement, suggests circulation, all qualities that we want with chi. Even though I would count stillness as an aspect of movement, and the quality of that movement has effects on how we feel and the health of our body, health of our tissues. So flow that is too excessive, or flow that gets jammed up somewhere, stagnant, excessive, stuck, or deficient, right? So we can picture a river, a fast moving river, one that gets dammed up, one that gets, pulled in places, or one that is, just not flowing anymore. So these are all qualities we can assign to our chi flow. So another way to understand chi, or get closer to understanding it, is that it is the connection between thought and action, or thought and form. My husband and I once described it as the and in cause and effect. So it's that connecting point, it's that flow, that current between having a thought and the organizing of the bodily processes, or whatever's relative to that thought, to move through. So if you have the thought of tensing up your muscle or lifting your arm, that connection between having the thought and activating the muscles, activating the nervous system, that is what we would call qi in this particular state. Like I said, it can take a lot of manifestations depending on what we're talking about. But it's that organizing principle between thought and then what happens in the body, or what happens in our life. So intention is very important. So coming back to Qigong practice, the Chinese, who do love their militaristic analogies, would look at Qigong as the body is the battlefield. Of course, there's a plane going over. Mind is the general, and Qi is the troops. So there's a saying in Qigong that the yi, which is mind, leads the Qi. So Qi cannot be pushed. Qi can only be led, and it is led by where the general's attention is. And this is a really key point to understand, because whatever we're thinking, especially if those thoughts have some kind of weight to them, our qi is getting ready to organize some process of following through, some action, some response, right? And, think about when we say we're feeling scattered, because our thoughts are in a million places. Well, the troops are running around trying to fulfill the orders, as it were, of, whatever the general's focusing on. And it seems rather obvious in a sense, but I think when we really experiment with the power of this, and recognizing that our attention is the most important commodity we have, we start to really take that seriously, noticing how it is affecting our state of well-being, the quality of our lives. Why Qigong is such an important healing practice is because we discipline ourselves, not only to be able to focus the mind more singularly, but to start to really experience the power of what that will do for our bodies, for our well-being. And we know this when we, I'm assuming a lot of us have had this understanding and awareness that, all we have to do is remember something that happened yesterday or 3 weeks ago and have a visceral reaction if it was something that was intense, an argument or an injury of some sort. Or we worry about something happening in the future and we have a physical response to it, right? Like, these are just thoughts, but they're thoughts that start to generate a response. Emotions, in a sense, are thoughts that have meaning for us attached to them, and then the body is mobilizing in response. How do we know we're angry? Well, we can feel it. We can feel a particular set of responses in our body, tension or something rising in us. All of these words are depicting movement of qi in response to where our thoughts are going. I had an experience a few years ago with this, being somebody that pays a lot of attention to, my bodily sensations, but I was asleep one night. I was dead asleep. I was, in one of those cycles where I was coming out of deep sleep into just kind of a momentary wakefulness, and was very aware of how completely relaxed I was. The room was quiet. The evening was quiet. I was aware of just being dead weight on the mattress, how super relaxed I was feeling. And then randomly this thought came into my head about a knick-knack that I received when I turned 40, and we had just moved into this new house, and I just realized, I didn't know where that knick-knack was. Did it make it in the move? I couldn't Why I focused on that, I have no idea. But all of a sudden, and I did not move a muscle. I had no intention of getting out of bed and looking for it, but my mind was already going from room to room. And I could feel just the very slightest activation of my muscles. Like I almost felt like I was coming to the surface of, like a dark pool, a deep pool. And now I could feel myself just in a different, slightly activated state, even though I was still fairly relaxed, but I wasn't as relaxed as I was. And now my mind was going. And I remember thinking, like, that's what that feels like. I am noticing the chi response, in addition, in response to having this thought of where is that thing, and I, still haven't found it. So, but it was very interesting, and I think, okay, how many millions of times a day does this happen? Whether it's something happening in front of me, whether I'm daydreaming, particularly when we're exposing ourselves to information or even whatever it is, entertainment or something where we're not physically involved. The thoughts are involved, the feelings are involved, but there's chi that's activating, but it has nowhere to go. It has no process of following through and completing the circuit, if you will. So we have this field, this battlefield, this medium full of open electrical circuits and currents that aren't, they aren't completing the loop, as it were. And I dare say, I think it has a lot to do with our feelings of overwhelm and chronic tension patterns and just agitation. It's this charge we're carrying that needs to be discharged, needs to be moved, needs to be released in some way. And so the practice of Qigong, to me, on one of the most basic levels, is how we can do that, how we can discipline our awareness to stay with ourselves, to stay with the movement. As we start to learn how the chi flows specifically through the body, through the limbs, and the effects that has on our internal organs and our emotions, then we can start to really pay more attention to that, more awareness with that, with a sense of shifting things and possibly healing conditions. And to that end, once we recognize that this is just as much, if not more, a mental discipline practice as it is a physical one, to realize that, even as we learn the movements, and there's endless things to learn about the movements, of course, how a different arm position can change your experience and your chi flow, but that the discipline of learning the movements and mastery of the movements is not only not the goal, because often when we master the movements, that's when we're in danger of checking out and starting to just go through the motions, and then we've lost the whole point of the Qigong practice. But the goal being that we don't have to do the movements at all, that we can imagine doing the movements and the Qi will be responding, because that's actually what it's responding to, right? Is what we're thinking about the movements, where our thoughts are going, where our E is leading, what our general is ordering. And then, if you want to go further, who's the general answering to, but that's a whole nother topic. So anyway, I hope that wasn't too confusing or overwhelming, and it maybe brings things a little bit more into practicality. And you certainly don't take my word for it, practice it for yourself. This or any move, or pick one movement from the practice. And if you're not doing the 8 pieces practice, pick any kind of stretch that involves a couple parts. Do it while you're paying attention, and then try it again while you're watching TV or something else is taking your mind away from your body, and just notice the difference in how you feel and the outcome. All right, so I hope that was somewhat helpful and coherent. And we'll talk more about this, because I think it's a really I think it's a really key lesson and discipline for us. I mean, clearly it was hundreds of years ago, the The same monkey mind issues applied then as they do now, only we have a lot more coming at us, a lot more to distract us away from our own internal experience and the importance of being able to experience our own self-control, our own power of choice, and how much that can change your life. All right. Questions, comments, let me know. You know where to find me. All right. Thank you for watching.